topic for today is research process. So before going to research process, let's discuss the meaning about research. Research basically is a systematic investigation to establish facts or principles or to collect information on a particular subject. It is basically to explore something new or something which is hidden, which is not known to you. That is basically what research is. That is to carry on investigation into a particular subject or a problem. So the steps which are followed to undertake such research is known as a research process, and it requires a lot of patience, and a researcher has to follow these process in a systematic manner. So the first step in a research problem is to select a research problem, which is a very tedious and a difficult job, because to select the problem for which you are going to research, you are going to put on your efforts, time, money, everything. That problem should be a one which is practical, which is important, and it should be such which has an acceptability in the market, and it should be ethical as well as politically acceptable, because if you undertake a research which is not important, which is not in an ethical way, then the whole efforts put in by you are of no use. So the first step is a selection of a good research problem. Then once the research problem is decided, the next step is to go in for a literature review. Literature review basically means to go through all journals, magazines about the topic on which you are going to undertake research, so that you are able to understand what is there in your problem, and all about all those things which researchers have already established about that problem, or what are the gaps which are still available, and you can undergo research in that gap area. So research review of literature or extensive literature survey basically deals with going through the various academic journals, conferences, government reports, thesis, to make sure about your research problem. Once you have undergone a research problem, this is what I'm going to undertake in my research, the next step is to make a hypothesis. Now, what is a hypothesis? Hypothesis is basically an assumption which will help you to narrow down the area of research, and it will give a right path on which a researcher will go. So it gives you a path on which you will go. So normally hypotheses are divided into two parts. One is a null hypothesis and second is an alternative hypothesis. Now what is a null hypothesis? Null hypothesis says that there is no difference between the sample and the universe. The sample you have drawn from the universe and the population, there is no difference in it. That means the results you will draw from the sample, if they hold true, that means they apply on the universe as well. So that is basically what a null hypothesis is. Whereas alternative hypothesis means, yes, there is a difference between your sample and the universe. So a researcher has to make hypothesis. Now, once a hypothesis is decided, the next step is to make or prepare a research design. Now, what is a research design? Research design is basically a framework or a blueprint which is prepared by a researcher so that he is able to undertake his research accordingly. As you know that we have different type of researchers. There are exploratory researchers, there are diagnostic and descriptive researchers, there are experimental researchers. So for each and every type of research, we have different type of research designs. So a researcher has to decide which type of research design he has to adopt. So for an exploratory research design, we have case studies, expertise views, which will help you in guiding how you will undertake a research. Whereas in case of a diagnostic and your descriptive researches, which helps you in finding out solutions about what, why, how, when, where this thing has happened. You want a solution about it. So a research design will be according to that, so that you get a solution to that. You are able to diagnose the problem from getting the answers to your questions. Whereas in case of an experimental researches, where you establish a cause and effect relationship, we have different type of research designs. So like we have pre-test, post-test designs, we have Latin sphere design, we have factorial design. So when a researcher undertakes research, so according to the nature and the purpose of his study, a research design is made by him, and it is basically the boundary or a framework in which he will undergo his research. So once you have made the boundary or a framework, the next step is to draw a sample, that is known as sampling. So sample means from where you will get respondent for your research, from where you will get data. So we have sampling, which is divided into two parts. One is known as the probability sampling and the other one is the non-probability sampling. So probability means on chance basis, like we have lottery system, random sampling is there. Whereas in case of non-probability sampling is like judgmental sampling, cluster sampling. So according to my research problem, I will draw a sample according to it. So once a sample is drawn, the next step is the data collection. This is the most important work a researcher has to do. So a good research is one which takes into consideration the combination of both primary data as well as the secondary data. So a research, according to again the type of data will depend upon the type or the nature of your research. So we have different methods available for collecting different type of data. So like for primary data, we have questionnaire as a base for data collection. So a researcher in this method, what a researcher do, he makes a list of questions according to his requirement of research. A list of questions are arranged in a very systematic order. He sends that he gets that questionnaire filled from the respondent face to face or with the help of the third party, which are known as the enumerators. Then he can collect the data, he can process the data, and according to his research he can analyze it. The other method is observation. Observation method of data collection is basically used in case of human psychological human behavior type of researches, where you observe the respondent's nature, his behavior on a particular event, or how he behaves in a particular situation. Next, we have interviews also as a method of primary data collection, in which we have different types of interviews, like personal interviews are there, where a direct connection is between the person who is collecting the data or the respondent. Then we have a focus group interviews, where there is a person who collects information about a particular area. Then we have depth interviews. Then we have projective techniques for data collection. So again, this all will depend upon the nature of the problem a researcher is going through and what type of information he wants. So the method of data collection will depend accordingly. Then we have other methods also, which are known as the secondary method. As we all know, secondary method is the second-hand method. We have review of literature like magazines, we have journals, we have nowadays in the age of this internet, we have e-books available, e-journals available, from which we can get the information required. Or we have the library, from where we can collect this information. We have thesis there, we have reports there, then we have official gazettes, government gazettes, from which we can get information. Then again we have non-official groups also. We have government agencies which provide information, and if required I can use that information for my research. So once the data method is collected and we have collected data from our respondent, the next step is data analysis. Now, what data analysis is? So the data collected, sometimes it is in the raw form. We have to arrange that, and that is known as data processing, and it is a technical job. And it is basically divided into two parts. One is called the data processing, and the second is called the data exposition. So now, what data processing includes? Data processing includes data editing. Data editing means to edit the data. Editing means cutting. That is, to cut all the data which is not of my use, which is incomplete, which is not according to my requirement. So that is called data editing. So once the data is edited, next is coding. Coding of data is very, very important, because for analysis purpose we have to codify my data, so that to give a quantity number to my data, so that it can be easily analysis, or it can be easily measured down. So once the data is coded, then a proper classification of data is done in your class, this class intervals, in open-end series or closed-end series, or an individual series. So data is classified, and or it is shown in a tabular form, so that the whole data is in front of you in a table form. So then we can present the data in graph form, picture form, because it is said कि a picture speaks, it tells about 100 words. So if data is presented before you in a form of a bar diagram or a histogram or a graph, you can easily analyze that data and you can easily interpret that data. So after data presentation, then there are methods to measure data. We have different methods for data measurement. That is, we have central tendency, we have standard deviation, measures of dispersion, we have correlation, regression. So all this comes under the data processing. So once the data processing is done, the next step is called the data exposition. It gives you the description, explanation about each and every table, narration, conclusions, findings about what you have gathered from the analysis of your data. So once all this is done, the next thing is to test our hypothesis. So what is hypothesis? That I have told you other, it is an assumption. So on that assumption we have done the whole process. Now I have to test that assumption from the information I have gathered. Okay, for this what I have to do is I have to apply different tests. So we have different tests according to the nature of your sample. So if we have a small sample, we have different tests. If we have a large sample, we have different tests. So normally we have t-test, z-test, chi-square test for different type of testing a hypothesis, and it all depends upon the nature of your sample, whether it is a small sample or a large sample. Normally a small sample is the one which has variable less than 30, and a large sample is one which has a variable greater than 30. So we have the test, and chi-square test is basically known as the most friendly test which is used for hypothesis. But nowadays there are other tests also which are being used to test a hypothesis. So one our test hypothesis is tested, and according to the results, whether our hypothesis is accepted or rejected, we have to find out this, and the answer of processing the testing hypothesis will tell whether my assumption is accepted or it is rejected from the information or the data I have collected. So once all this has been done, if the hypothesis is accepted, now the stage has come where where the researcher has to draw the conclusions or interpret what he has found from the research he has undertaken, what solutions he has found for the problem he has undertaken. So this is a stage where after hypothesis accepted or rejected, interpretation is done, and a generalization is done by the researcher, so that the solution to the problem finds a result and it is acceptable to the general public. Now once all these steps have been followed, the next step is preparing a report. Now why a report has to be prepared? If a researcher undertakes a research for himself only, then it is of no use. A good research is one which is helpful to the general public, to the society as a whole. Reason for it is that if you, for undertaking your research, you are using resources from the society, it is your duty that you give back to the society. So it is a duty of a researcher that once the whole research process is done, he has to make a report of his research so that this research can be used as a base for future researchers also. So preparation of a report um, demands particular things in mind. Number one, we have a primary stage. This stage, uh, a research design of the primary stage includes a brief executive summary of your um, research problem, then introduction of the problem, acknowledgement, preface, title of your research, okay, and the table of contents. That is the primary stage or the first part of your research. Then comes the main part. Main part includes the objective of your study, hypothesis, research methodology which you have used, sampling is a part of your research methodology, then explanation of the chapters, then your conclude this findings or interpretation you have done, then last is the closing of your report. Closing of report includes the bibliography, references, maps, charts, illustrations, appendix which you have used in your research. So this all has to be there in your report. So with this, the full process of research is over. Thank you.